Clara Whitmore didn't scream when they threw her off her own land. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She picked up the single bag they'd allowed her to keep, turned her back on the only home she'd ever known, and walked into the mountains, with nowhere to go and no one left to call her name. That was 3 days ago. Now the sky had split open above the Wind River Range, and Clara was on her knees in the mud, too cold to stand, too tired to care whether morning came or not. If this story already has you feeling something, stay with us. Subscribe to this channel, follow Clara and Caleb's journey all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1887 didn't warn anybody before it turned mean. That was the thing about the Wind River Mountains. They'd give you 3 weeks of sky so blue it made a man believe in God. And then, without a single cloud to signal the change, the whole range would convulse like something buried deep had finally decided it was done being patient. Caleb Boone had lived long enough in these mountains to know the signs. The way the horses got restless an hour before the first crack of thunder. The way the pines went still. Not peaceful still, but waiting still, like they were bracing for a blow. The way the temperature dropped 10 degrees in the time it took to finish a cup of coffee. He'd read all the signs that evening, and he'd gone out anyway. 3 of his cattle had broken through the east fence line sometime in the afternoon, and Caleb wasn't a man who left things unfinished. Not cattle, not fences, not anything. He'd pulled on his duster, saddled his roan stallion, Buck, and ridden out into the gray light with the kind of grim purpose that had become the only language he still spoke fluently. He didn't talk much these days, didn't need to. There was nobody left to listen. The storm hit hard around 9 o'clock. The lightning came first, big, jagged strikes that lit up the whole valley for half a second at a time, turning the dark into something sharp and disorienting. Then the thunder followed so close behind that Buck shied sideways, and Caleb had to grip with his knees and talk the animal down with a low, steady murmur. Easy, easy now. It's just noise. He found 2 of the cattle without much trouble. They'd pressed themselves into a stand of rock just below the tree line, stupid with fear, and easy enough to drive back toward the fence once he got them moving. The 3rd one was the problem. Always was. There was one black heifer in his small herd that had the particular stubbornness of an animal who had learned that consequences were survivable, and she had gotten herself up into the timber on the north slope, which was the last place a man wanted to be in a lightning storm. Caleb went in after her. He found her eventually. She'd gotten tangled in some deadfall, one foreleg twisted in a way that would have been serious if she'd been pulling any harder. He dismounted in the rain, spoke to her in the same low tone he used on Buck, and worked her leg free with the kind of careful patience that had once made his wife laugh at him. "You talk to that animal like she understands English," she used to say. "She understands tone," he'd always answered. "Same as anybody." He didn't let himself stay in that memory. He never did. He'd learned early on that memories were doorways, and some doorways you kept nailed shut, because what was on the other side wasn't anything you could afford to walk into and still come back. He got the heifer free, got her moving, turned Buck back toward the fence line with all 3 cattle somewhere behind him in the dark and rain. That was when he heard it. He almost didn't. The rain was loud by then, the kind of steady, driving rain that filled up all the space between sounds and made the world feel very small and very close. But there was something underneath it, something that wasn't wind and wasn't animal. Caleb pulled Buck to a stop, stood there in the rain, head tilted slightly, listening the way a man listens when he isn't sure what he heard, but something in his chest has already decided it mattered. Then it came again. A sob, broken and exhausted. Not the sob of someone who had just started crying, but the sob of someone who had been crying so long they didn't have the strength to stop. Coming from his left, somewhere in the timber, maybe 30 yards off the trail. Caleb didn't deliberate. He turned Buck toward the sound. The lightning flared, and that's when he saw her. She was at the base of a big ponderosa pine, half sitting and half collapsed, her back against the bark and her knees pulled to her chest. Her dress was soaked through and torn at the hem, streaked with mud from the waist down. Her feet, he registered this with a jolt, her feet were bare. No boots, no shoes of any kind, just bare feet against the wet pine needles and the cold mountain ground. She heard him coming. Her head snapped up, and even in the dark between lightning strikes, he could see the terror in her face. The flinch of a person who had already learned to expect the worst from whoever came next. "Don't," her voice was raw. "Don't come any closer." Caleb stopped Buck 6 feet away, held up one hand, palm out, the universal language of, "I'm not reaching for anything." "Ma'am?" His voice was quiet, steady. "I'm not going to hurt you." "I don't know you." She pressed herself harder against the tree. "I don't know who sent you." "Nobody sent me." He kept his hand up. "I was moving cattle. I heard you." He paused. "Your feet are bare." She looked down at her own feet like she'd forgotten. Something crossed her face. Not embarrassment exactly. More like the look of someone who has been stripped of so many things that bare feet had stopped registering on the list of losses worth mourning. "I lost my boots 2 days ago," she said. "The creek crossing. The water was higher than I thought." 2 days. He looked at her more carefully. The hollows under her eyes. The way her hands were shaking. Not just from cold, though it was cold enough tonight to make that part of it, but shaking with the bone-deep tremor of a body that had been pushed past what it could reasonably endure. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. She hesitated. 3 days. 3 days in the mountains. He said it flat, not a question. "Alone?" "Yes." "Where were you trying to get to?" The question seemed to hit her somewhere painful. She pulled her knees tighter and looked away from him, out into the dark and rain. "I don't know," she said finally. "Anywhere. Somewhere that wasn't back." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. The lightning threw its harsh, white light across the scene. The big pine, the woman huddled at its base, the bare feet against the cold ground. And then the dark swallowed it all again. He swung down from Buck. She tensed immediately, and he heard the sharp intake of her breath. "I'm not going to touch you," he said. "I'm going to stand here." He did exactly that. Stood in the rain, about 4 feet from her, not advancing, not retreating, just present. Steady in the way that Buck was steady during thunder, which was the only model of steadiness he had anymore. "But I need you to hear me say something true." She watched him, wary, waiting. "If I leave you here," Caleb said, "you'll be dead by morning. Not because of anything dramatic, just cold and exposure. 3 days without proper shelter, no boots, soaked through." He glanced at the sky and then back at her. "The temperature's still dropping. Another 2-3 hours of this rain, your body won't be able to hold heat anymore." He paused. "I've got a cabin, 20-minute ride, dry wood, a stove, food. That's all I'm offering." Silence. The rain came down between them. "Why?" she asked. It was such a simple word, and it carried so much inside it. "Why would you help me? Why should I believe you? Why does anyone do anything for anyone out here?" Caleb thought about it. He was a man who preferred honest answers to convenient ones. "Because you were crying," he said, "and I heard you, and I can't unhear it." He picked up Buck's reins. "That's the whole of it, ma'am. No other. She looked at him for a long time, long enough that the lightning came twice more, illuminating her face both times. He watched her make the calculation he'd seen people make before, the math of trust when trust had cost you before, the weighing of a known danger against an unknown one, cold and certain death on one side, a stranger on a horse on the other. "I can't walk much," she finally said. Her voice had changed slightly. The defensiveness hadn't left it, but something else had come in alongside it. Something exhausted. Something that was very close to the last edge. "You don't have to walk," Caleb said. "I'll help you up." He approached slowly, one step at a time, keeping his hands visible. When he got close enough, he crouched down to her level, rather than standing over her. Up close, she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe late 20s, and her eyes, dark and red-rimmed from crying, held the particular haunted look he recognized from mirrors. The look of someone who had lost something they couldn't replace, and hadn't yet found any reason to move forward from the losing. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked. She swallowed, seemed to consider whether to give it. "Clara," she said. "Clara Whitmore." "Caleb Boone." He offered it simply, like the exchange of names was a contract. Maybe it was. "Can you put your arms around my neck, Mrs. Whitmore?" "Miss," she said, and something in the correction hurt her visibly. "It's Miss, now." He didn't ask about that. Wasn't the time. He just nodded and helped her up, and she was light in a way that alarmed him. Not small light, but empty light. The weight of a person from whom too many things had been taken. And he got her up onto Buck in front of him, wrapped his duster around her as well as he could manage, and turned the horse toward home. She didn't speak during the ride. Caleb didn't either. The rain hammered down, and Buck picked his way carefully through the dark, and Caleb kept one arm around Clara Whitmore's waist to keep her from sliding, and he felt her shivering slow by degrees as the body heat between them, the purely practical fact of two living bodies in close proximity, began to do what cold couldn't prevent living things from doing. She was asleep before they reached the cabin, or close enough to sleep that he couldn't tell the difference. The cabin was one room, built solid against the mountain, and Caleb had kept it in the practical, unadorned way of a man who had stopped thinking of any place as a home some years ago. It was clean because Caleb was clean by nature, not by sentiment. The stove was cold, but there was dry wood stacked inside the door, which was the habit of a man who'd spent enough winters in the mountains to treat preparedness like religion. He got Clara inside and settled her into the single chair by the stove, the one piece of furniture in the cabin that could be said to approximate comfort. He got a fire going, got water on for coffee, pulled a wool blanket from the trunk at the foot of the cot, and wrapped it around her before she'd fully opened her eyes. "You're safe," he said, when her eyes came open and went wide with the instinctive panic of waking in an unfamiliar place. "You're in my cabin. You're safe." She looked around the room, took stock of it with the methodical eyes of a practical woman. The stove, the single cot, the table with two chairs, the rifle above the door, the hooks for gear along the wall. He watched her register that there was only one cot and file it away somewhere. "I'll sleep on the floor," he said. "Don't worry about that." She pulled the blanket tighter, said nothing. Caleb poured coffee when it was ready and set a cup near her hand. He'd found some dried beef and hardtack in the cabinet and set that near her too, not making a production of it, just putting it within reach. He'd learned something, in these years of living alone, about the difference between offering and forcing, about how animals and people both needed to make their own decision about coming towards something, even when they needed it badly. She ate slowly, both hands around the coffee cup at first, just absorbing the warmth. Then the hardtack, carefully, like someone who'd been hungry long enough to know not to rush. Caleb sat at the table with his own coffee and watched the fire. "The storm will pass by morning," he said. Not to fill silence, just because it was true, and he thought she might need something true to hold on to. "Yes," she said. More silence. The fire crackled. The rain on the roof was softer now, losing its fury. "You said 3 days," he said, "in the mountains." "Yes." "Where'd you start from?" She looked at him across the room, assessing whether he was asking out of curiosity or something else. He kept his face neutral and waited. "Sweetwater Valley," she said, finally. There was a ranch, my husband and I. He passed last November. Fever." She stopped, started again. "After he passed, the bank sent notice that there were debts I didn't know about. Walter Griggs, he owns the bank in Millhaven. He said the debts were against the land, that the land was collateral." Her jaw tightened. "I told him the debts weren't legitimate, that I'd never signed anything. He said the documents disagreed with me." Caleb's coffee cup paused halfway to his mouth. "He showed me papers with my signature," Clara said. "My signature, or something that looked like it. I don't know how. I never signed any loan document." She looked at her hands. "His men came 4 days ago. The sheriff was with them. They said I had until sundown to take my things and leave." "The sheriff went along with it," Caleb said. "Sheriff Dalton said there was nothing he could do, that the bank had legal papers." Her voice had gone flat. Not emotionless, the opposite. The flatness of someone holding a great deal very carefully. "I had a bag. They let me take 1 bag. They watched me walk off my own porch." She looked up. "So I walked." "Into the Wind River Range." He said it without judgment. "I didn't have anywhere particular in mind," she said, with a ghost of something, not quite humor, but the skeleton of it. "I just knew if I went toward Millhaven, or any of the towns in the valley, Griggs would find out I hadn't disappeared, and he'd send someone after me. He wants that land, Mr. Boone. Not just mine. He's been buying up the whole valley, 1 parcel at a time. The ones who won't sell, things happen to them." She paused. "My neighbor, Thomas Hale, wouldn't sell. His barn burned down 2 months ago. They said it was an accident." Caleb set his coffee cup down. He'd heard about Walter Griggs. The name had reached even this far into the mountains, carried by the occasional rider who passed through, or the supply runs Caleb made to Millhaven twice a year. The banker who'd come in 5 years ago from back east and had been quietly acquiring property across the valley ever since. Caleb had not paid it much attention. He'd made it his business these last years to not pay much attention to anything that lived below the tree line. He looked at Clara Whitmore across his cabin. She was watching him steadily now, the initial fear from the mountainside replaced by something more complicated. The careful, measuring look of a woman who had decided she was going to survive this, and was constantly recalculating what that survival required. "What do you plan to do?" he asked. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "But I'm not going to just accept it." Her chin came up, a small and defiant gesture. "It's my land. My husband broke that ground. We built that house board by board. He's buried there, Mr. Boone. His grave is on that land." Her voice didn't break, but it came close. "I'm not going to let Walter Griggs stand on that ground and act like it was always his." The fire snapped. Outside, the rain had softened to a steady drizzle, the worst of the storm moving off east toward the plains. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Sleep. We can talk more in the morning." "I don't want your charity," she said immediately. The words came out fast, reflexive, the pride of someone for whom independence had been the one thing left that nobody could take. "I know," he said. "I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a dry place to sleep for 1 night." He stood and moved to the floor beside the stove, pulling a bedroll from under the cot. "The cot's yours. I've slept on worse than this floor." She looked at him for a long beat. He could see her working against herself, the exhaustion fighting the pride, the body's basic need making its argument against the harder, more defended parts of her. The exhaustion won. It usually did. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Mr. Boone." "Caleb," he said. "Nobody calls me Mr. Boone." She didn't say anything else, but when he spread his bedroll by the stove and settled himself with his back to her for the sake of her privacy, he heard her lie down on the cot and heard the long, slow exhale of a woman who had not let herself stop moving long enough to fall apart, and who had, finally, against all her intentions, been stopped. He lay in the dark and listened to the rain taper off and the fire breathe, and the slow, evening out rhythm of her breathing. He had not had another person in this cabin in 4 years. He had not realized, until right now, how loud silence could be. He was up before dawn. That was habit. The kind of habit that lives below thought, in the muscles and the bones. He fed the stove without making noise, got water boiling, checked on the cattle through the one small window. Buck was in the lean-to out back, settled and dry, unbothered by last night's storm with the equine philosophical acceptance that Caleb had always envied. He let Clara sleep. She woke an hour past dawn, sat up fast with that same flinching alertness, and then went still as the cabin settled back into her memory. He watched the recognition move through her face, where she was, how she'd gotten here, what had been taken from her, and what had been left. He put a plate of food on the table without comment. Salt pork, biscuits he'd made from his stores, coffee, plain and sufficient. He sat at the far end of the table with his own plate and ate in silence. She got up. She was steadier on her feet than last night, which was something. She sat across from him, looked at the food, and ate without speaking. After a while, she said, "Your wife?" He looked up. She nodded at the corner of the cabin, at the small shelf above the window where a single item sat. A woman's hairbrush, ivory-backed, sitting where it had always sat because he'd never been able to make himself move it. "I notice things," she said simply. "No woman's clothes. No woman's anything. Except that." "She passed," he said. "How long ago?" 4 years. He looked at his coffee. "The baby came early. She didn't make it through it." He paused. "Neither did the baby." Clara was quiet for a moment. When he looked up, her face held nothing performative. No practiced sympathy. No, "the words you say." Just recognition. The straightforward acknowledgement of one person who had carried something to another person who had carried something. "I'm sorry," she said. "So am I," he said. That was all, but it was enough. Something in the cabin shifted slightly. The atmosphere of two strangers, already modified by last night's emergency, adjusting again into something that didn't have a clean name yet. "I need to get back to Sweetwater Valley," she said. "I need to find someone who can help me contest those documents. A lawyer. Someone who knows land law." "Closest lawyer I know of is in Lander," Caleb said. "Day's ride." "Then I need to get to Lander." She said it with the flat, determined practicality of a woman making a plan with whatever materials were available. "I have no horse, no money, no boots." She looked at her feet, which he'd wrapped last night in strips of cloth from a spare shirt. They'd been cut up badly from 3 days of mountain terrain and needed proper tending before she could walk any real distance on them. Caleb ate a biscuit, looked out the window at the morning. The storm had left everything rinsed and bright, the way mornings after bad weather always were in the mountains, as if the violence of the night before had scoured something clean. "I've got a pair of boots you might be able to make work," he said. "Too big, but we can pack them. And I can take you to Lander." She looked at him. Why? There was that word again. He recognized that for Clara Whitmore, it was the most important question she knew how to ask. Probably had been for a while. Because Griggs is doing what you said he's doing, Caleb answered. And I live on the edge of this valley too. He set his fork down. And because doing nothing has a cost, same as doing something. I've been paying that cost for 4 years, and I'm tired of the installments. She studied him across the table. The sunlight was coming through the single window now, falling across the table between them, and he could see in full light what the dark and the rain had only showed him in pieces. The intelligence in her face, the weariness that sat on her like weather, the stubborn set of her jaw that he suspected never entirely left, even in sleep. "All right," she said. "Thank you. Again." "Don't thank me yet," Caleb said, and stood to clear the plates. "Griggs didn't get this far by losing gracefully. When he finds out you're still alive and you're fighting him, he'll come at this harder than documents and eviction notices." Clara looked up at him steadily. "I know," she said. "You're not afraid of that?" She thought about it. Honest, the way she seemed to be honest about most things. "I'm afraid of plenty," she said. "But I'm more afraid of what happens if I just disappear and let him win." She paused. Thomas Hale's barn burned down. 2 families on the east side of the valley sold out after their wells went dry. People say that was deliberate. "My husband is buried on land that a man is trying to steal with forged papers." Her eyes were steady on him. "If I disappear and say nothing, the next person he does this to won't even have the story of someone who tried." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the plates and took them to the wash basin. "We'll leave within the hour," he said. "I'll need to secure the cattle first." They rode out into a morning that had no memory of the night before. Clara sat behind him on Buck, her wrapped feet in the 2 big boots he'd packed with rags until they fit well enough, her hands resting lightly on her own knees, not holding on to him unless the terrain required it, maintaining the dignity of not needing to hold on. He noticed that. He noticed, more specifically, that the way she held herself on horseback was practiced. Whoever Clara Whitmore had been before the winter and the bank and Walter Griggs had taken their pieces of her, she had been a woman who could ride. The Wind River Mountains fell away behind them as they descended toward the valley, and the morning opened up around them. The long golden sweep of the high grass, the line of cottonwoods along the creek to the east, the blue smoke of Millhaven somewhere far ahead and below. "Tell me about Griggs," Caleb said. "Everything you know." Clara was quiet for a moment, organizing it. Then she began to talk. She talked for the better part of 2 hours. By the time the first buildings of Lander came into view, Caleb Boone understood 3 things with certainty. First, Walter Griggs was not going to stop at Clara Whitmore's land. He never had been. The Sweetwater Valley purchase was a piece of something larger, and the forged documents and the evictions and Thomas Hale's barn were not the beginning of it. Second, Clara Whitmore was the only person who had the specific knowledge and the specific stubbornness to actually challenge what Griggs was doing. And third, whatever had brought him out into the storm last night to chase 3 wayward cattle, luck, habit, the mountain's own inscrutable will, it had also put him in the path of the one thing that could pull him back down from 4 years of deliberate isolation. A fight worth having. He didn't let himself think about the other thing yet. The way she'd felt asleep against him on the ride in last night. The particular weight of someone who had been holding themselves up so hard for so long, finally let down. The way the morning light had sat on her face across the table. Those things could wait. There was work to do first. The lawyer's name was Ed, and he had the kind of face that had stopped pretending to be optimistic sometime around 1879. He listened to Clara without interrupting, which Caleb respected. He sat behind his desk in the small Lander office with his fingers pressed together and his eyes on Clara's face. And he let her say the whole of it: the death of her husband, the bank notice, the documents with her forged signature, the sheriff standing on her porch while Griggs's men watched her walk away from everything she owned. When she finished, Pierce was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Caleb. "You're involved in this how?" he asked. "I'm not," Caleb said. "Yet." Pierce looked back at Clara. "The problem," he said, "is that Walter Griggs has been doing business in this territory for 5 years. He has relationships with the land office. He has relationships with the circuit judge who covers Fremont County." He paused. "He may have relationships with people in this office, for all I can tell you." Clara's jaw tightened. "So you won't help me?" "I didn't say that." Pierce leaned forward. "I said the problem. The problem is that contesting forged documents requires either a witness to the forgery or a document examiner willing to testify that the signature isn't yours. Both of those things cost money and take time, and Griggs knows that. He counts on it." He tapped the desk. "Do you have any documentation of your own? Anything from when you and your husband originally filed on that land?" "The original homestead certificate," Clara said immediately. "I kept it. It's in my bag. I grabbed it when they came. It was the first thing I took." Pierce's expression shifted slightly. "May I see it?" Clara opened her bag and produced a folded document, worn at the creases but intact. She set it on the desk. Pierce examined it for a long moment, and Caleb watched the man's face do something it probably didn't do often. It became slightly more animated. "This is filed with the Federal Land Office," Pierce said. "Original signature from the Territorial Register, dated 1881. He looked up. "Griggs's claim document. When did he say your husband took the loan?" "He said 1883, Clara said. "This homestead certificate supersedes a private loan claim in terms of original title. It doesn't settle the forgery question, but it gives us standing to challenge the seizure." Pierce sat back. "It won't be fast, and it won't be cheap, but it's something." "I have no money," Clara said flatly. "I told you that." "I know." Pierce looked at her steadily. "I'll take it on contingency. If we win, I take 15% of the land's assessed value. If we lose," he spread his hands, "I've lost the hours." Clara stared at him. "Why?" Caleb almost smiled at that. There it was again. Pierce said, "Because Griggs has done this before, to other people who didn't have a homestead certificate, and didn't have the spine to walk into my office and say what you just said." He folded his hands. "And because I've been a lawyer in this territory for 11 years, and I would like, before I die, to win one case that actually matters." Clara looked at the homestead certificate on the desk, looked at Pierce. Something behind her eyes shifted. Not relief, not yet, but the first faint structure of something that could become hope if you gave it enough time and didn't look at it too directly. "All right," she said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Pierce said, in almost the exact same tone Caleb had used that morning. And Caleb saw Clara notice the echo of it. "Griggs will know within 2 days that someone is contesting the claim. He has eyes in the land office. When he finds out, he'll come at it harder," Clara said. She wasn't asking. "Yes." Pierce gathered the certificate carefully. "Where are you staying?" Clara opened her mouth and then stopped. Caleb watched her realize, with the small particular exhaustion of someone whose problems keep revealing new layers, that she had nowhere to stay. No money. No family in this part of the territory. Nothing. Caleb looked out the window. Then he looked at the floor. Then he looked at the ceiling. Then he said, "She can stay at my place, until the legal situation is settled." The room went quiet. Clara turned to look at him. The expression on her face was complicated in a way that he couldn't entirely parse. Part pride objecting, part something else entirely. "That's not necessary," she said. "It's practical," he said. "You have no money and nowhere to go."
I have a cabin, and I'm 2 hours from Millhaven, which is where whatever happens next is going to happen. He kept his voice even, matter of fact, the way you talked about fixing a fence or moving cattle. "It's practical." "People will talk," she said. "People talk," Caleb said, "about everything. Doesn't change the math." Pierce was looking at his desk with the carefully neutral expression of a man who had decided this particular conversation was not his business. Clara was quiet for a long moment. He could see her running through the alternatives and finding the same thing at the end of each of them. Nothing. She had nothing else. "I'll earn my keep," she said finally. "I'm not a guest." "I know," Caleb said. "There's enough work for 3 people at that place, and only 1 of me. You'd be doing me a favor." It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely a lie either. They rode back into the mountains in the afternoon, and something about the return trip was different from the morning's descent. Different in a way that neither of them named, because naming it would have made it something they'd have to decide what to do with. The morning had been emergency and momentum. The afternoon was a choice. And choices had a different weight. Clara asked questions about the land as they rode. Practical questions, specific ones. About the fence lines, about the water source, about the size of the herd. Caleb answered all of them. He noticed she listened the way a person listens when they're actually learning something, not just waiting for a pause. "How long have you been up here?" she asked. 4 years, he said. "Came up after—" He stopped, started again. "Just came up." "You said you left town." "I did." "Do you miss it?" she asked. "People? Community?" He thought about it honestly. "I missed it at first," he said. "Then I got used to not missing it. Then I forgot I used to miss it." He paused. "That's probably not a healthy thing, if you ask the right kind of person." "I'm not the right kind of person," Clara said. "I understand the impulse." They rode in silence for a while. Then she said, "His name was Robert, my husband. He was a good man. Quiet. He didn't say much, but when he said something, he meant it." She paused. "He used to say the land was alive, that it remembered the people who worked it. I thought it was a strange thing to believe." Another pause, longer. "I don't think it's strange anymore." Caleb didn't say anything. Sometimes the only right response to a thing was to hear it. "The grave is at the east corner," she said, "under the cottonwood. He picked that spot himself, before he got sick. Said the light was right there in the afternoon." Her voice was steady, but threaded with something underneath. "Walter Griggs is going to stand on that piece of ground and never once think about what's under it." "Not if we can help it," Caleb said. The "we" came out before he'd made a decision about it. He felt Clara notice it, a slight shift in her posture. Not dramatic, just the small adjustment of a person recalibrating. "Why do you care?" she asked, quietly. Not challenging, genuinely asking. He took a moment. "Because I stopped caring about things for 4 years," he said, "and I forgot what it felt like to have a reason to be angry about something outside my own head." The honesty of it surprised him slightly as it came out. "Griggs buying up the valley doesn't touch me directly. I'm far enough up the mountain that I'm not worth his trouble." He paused. "But it could. And even if it couldn't, what he did to you is wrong. And I know what wrong looks like. even when it's easier to look away. Quiet for a moment. Then, very simply, she said, "Thank you, Caleb." It was the first time she'd used his name. He noticed it the way you notice the first warm day after a long winter. Not with fanfare, just with the quiet recognition that something has changed. The first week had the shape of two people learning the grammar of sharing a space. Caleb established quickly that his habits were fixed. Up before dawn, work until noon, rest an hour, work until dark. Clara established just as quickly that she had no intention of being waited on. She was up before him the second morning, which startled him badly enough that he'd reached for the rifle before he'd processed what he was seeing. She was at the stove making coffee, wearing the spare clothes he'd given her, a man's shirt and trousers, the legs rolled up. And she'd looked at his hand on the rifle and said, very calmly, "I'm not a threat, Mr. Boone. I just couldn't sleep." "Caleb," he said, putting the rifle down. "We settled that." "Caleb," she said, and handed him a cup. She worked. That was the thing that struck him, and kept striking him. She worked with the unself-conscious competence of someone who had never thought of labor as something to be performed for observation. She repaired a gap in the east fence line the third day, which he'd been meaning to get to for 2 weeks. And when he came around the corner of the barn to find her there, driving posts with his mallet with a methodical efficiency, he stopped walking and just stood there for a moment. "You've done this before," he said. "Every spring," she said, without looking up from the post. "Robert's back wasn't good after the second year. I took the fencing." She drove another blow. "I don't mind it. There's something satisfying about a thing that stays where you put it." He moved to take the next post from the pile and hold it steady while she drove it. They worked the rest of the fence line together without much talking, and it was a different kind of silence than the silences they'd been having. Not the silence of two people being careful around each other, but the silence of two people who were occupied with the same task. A shared silence. The kind that's a different animal entirely. By the end of the week, they had a routine. It wasn't discussed or decided. It simply accumulated, the way routines do when people are practical and the work doesn't stop for feelings. Evenings were harder. The work ran out, and the cabin had only the stove and the table and the window and the fire. Clara mended things. She had found his pile of things that needed mending, which was considerable, and had started on it without asking, with the same matter-of-fact competence she brought to everything. Caleb read when he read, and when he didn't, he sat with his coffee and thought about the situation with Griggs, turning it over. One evening he said, "Tell me everything you remember about the documents Griggs showed you. The loan papers." Clara looked up from the mending. "Everything? The date, the amount, whether there was a witness signature, whether the notary stamp looked right." She told him, and as she talked, her eyes went distant in the way they went when she was accessing something she'd stored very precisely. The way a person stores something they intend to use as evidence. "The witness signature," she said suddenly. "It was someone named Holt. James Holt." She looked at him. "But there's no James Holt in Sweetwater Valley. I know everyone in that valley. There's no one by that name." Caleb leaned forward. "You're certain?" "I'm certain." Her voice had changed, tightened, quickened. "The name didn't make sense to me when I saw it, and I couldn't figure out why. And now I realize why. Because he doesn't exist. The witness is invented." "That's what Pierce needs," Caleb said. "A witness signature that can be proven false is the same as proving the whole document is false." He stood up. "I need to write to Pierce tonight." "Caleb," she was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen from her yet. Not just gratitude, but something that was working at a deeper level. The expression of a person who has been carrying something alone for long enough that they've forgotten what it feels like to have someone in it with them. "He didn't have to do any of this." "I know," he he said. "Why did you?" she asked, softer than the other times she'd asked it. Not the defensive why of the mountain or the lawyer's office. The real one. He looked at her across the cabin. The fire was low and the light was amber, and she was sitting there in his too big shirt with a half-mended piece of his gear in her hands and looking at him like the answer was something that mattered. "Because you didn't disappear," he said. "Griggs was counting on you disappearing. Everybody counted on you disappearing." He paused. "And you didn't. You walked 3 days through the mountains with no shoes because you wouldn't disappear."
He picked up the pen. Somebody ought to be on the side of a person like that. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back down at the mending. "Write your letter," she said quietly. He did. The rider came on a Tuesday. Caleb was out with the cattle, and Clara was at the cabin when she heard the horse. And later she told Caleb she'd known from the sound of it that it wasn't a friendly call. There was something about the speed, not the easy lope of someone making a visit, but the deliberate trot of someone delivering a message and intending the delivery to land hard. She was standing in the doorway when the rider pulled up. Young man, wore his gun low and kept his hand near it, which told her everything she needed to know about who'd sent him. "You Clara Whitmore?" he said. "I am," she said. "Mr. Griggs wants you to know," the rider said, "that contesting the bank's claim on the Whitmore property is a waste of your time and a waste of his patience." He looked at her with the specific contempt of someone who has been told the person they're looking at doesn't matter. "He says the documents are legal. He says the lawyer you talked to in Lander is going to find that out. And he says," the writer paused like he was delivering the important part now, "that people who make trouble in this valley have a way of running out of options." Clara held the doorframe. She didn't step back. "You tell Mr. Griggs," she said, "that I have the original homestead certificate for that land, filed federal in 1881. You tell him I have a lawyer who has already submitted a challenge to the land office. And you tell him that the witness signature on his loan document is a man who doesn't exist." She watched the writer's face change slightly. "You tell him all of that. And you tell him I'm not in the mountains anymore. He knows where to find me." The rider stared at her. Then he wheeled his horse and rode hard back the way he'd come. Caleb was standing 20 feet behind her. He'd come back from the cattle pasture and stopped when he saw the rider and stood silent, watching. She hadn't known he was there. She turned and found him, and for a moment they just looked at each other. "You should have waited for me," he said. "No," she said. "I shouldn't have." He looked at her. Then he nodded once, slow and real. "Well," he said, "Griggs knows you're here now." "Good," Clara said. "I'm tired of not being found." She went inside. Caleb stood there for another moment in the afternoon light, looking at the road where the rider had disappeared. Something in his chest was doing something he hadn't authorized it to do. He pressed it down and followed her inside. They had a letter to finish. Pierce's letter arrived 4 days after they'd sent theirs. Caleb read it at the table while Clara stood at the stove and pretended to be occupied with the coffee. He could tell she was pretending because she'd stopped moving the moment he broke the seal. And Clara Whitmore was not a woman who stood still without reason. "He filed the challenge," Caleb said. "Land office received it. They have to respond within 30 days. Clara turned around. "And Griggs has already hired a lawyer of his own, man named Cutter, out of Cheyenne." Caleb set the letter down. "Pierce says Cutter is the kind of lawyer who wins cases by making the other side too exhausted or too scared to keep going." "Then Pierce needs to not get exhausted or scared," Clara said. "He also says," Caleb paused, He says there's been talk in Millhaven about you being up with me. The cabin went quiet. Clara poured her coffee and set the pot down and didn't say anything for a moment. "What kind of talk?" she asked, her voice even. "The kind people use when they want to make a woman's credibility into a question," Caleb said. He said it flat and direct because she deserved that. "Griggs is putting it around that you're a woman of loose character who has made false claims to fraudulently contest a legitimate bank debt." Clara's hand tightened around her coffee cup. She said nothing. "It's a tactic," Caleb said. "It's meant to make you angry enough to do something rash or ashamed enough to stop." "I know what it is," she said quietly. She looked at the window. "My mother-in-law will hear that talk. Robert's family in Ohio." She stopped, swallowed. "They already think I stayed out west because I'm stubborn and reckless. Now they'll think—" She stopped again. "Clara." She looked at him. "Let them think what they want," he said. "What matters is the land office and the judge, not the talk." "Easy to say," she said. "Not bitter, just honest." "I know it is," he said. "I'm still right." She almost smiled at that. Almost. "You're insufferable when you're right." "I've been told," he said, and picked up the letter again. The second page was shorter. Pierce had written at the bottom in a different ink, as though it was an afterthought, added after he'd sealed and reopened the envelope. Caleb read it and set the letter face down on the table.
"What?" Clara asked immediately.
"Thomas Hale," Caleb said. "Your neighbor whose barn burned.
"Yes?"
He's gone. Left the valley 2 weeks ago. Sold his land to the bank for 1/3 of its value and left." Caleb looked at her. "Pierce says Hale told someone before he left that he'd been visited 3 nights in a row by men who didn't say anything. Just rode up to the house, sat outside in the dark for an hour, then left." Clara put her coffee cup down very carefully. "He has a wife," she said. 3 children." "I know." "Griggs didn't touch them," she said slowly, working through it. "He didn't need to. He just made sure Hale understood that he could." She looked at Caleb. "That's what he's going to do to us." "Maybe," Caleb said, "or something harder. We made more noise than Hale did." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she stood up straight, with the specific posture she got when she was refusing to be frightened in spite of being frightened. "Then we make more noise still," she said. "Who else in the valley has he done this to? Not the ones who left. The ones who are still there and still angry. There have to be some." Caleb thought about it. "Emmett Cross," he said slowly. "He runs cattle on the north side of the valley. Griggs tried to buy him out last spring. Emmett told him no, and the offer stopped. But Emmett told me after, the last time I was in Millhaven for supplies, that 2 of his hands quit the same week for no reason he could figure. Left without their full wages, which made no sense. He always thought Griggs paid them to go." "Emmett Cross," Clara said. "Could he be a witness? To the pressure Griggs puts on people?" "He could be," Caleb said, "if he's willing, which is the question." "Then we need to ask him." She was already moving toward her coat on the hook by the door. "Today, before Griggs gets to him first." Caleb stood. "Clara." She stopped. "If we ride to Emmett Cross today," he said, "and Griggs has eyes on this road, which he does, he'll know within the day that we're building something. That this isn't just a legal challenge, it's a coalition." He paused. "He won't send a rider with a warning after that." She met his eyes. "I know," she said. "I want to make sure you know," he said. "Really know." "Caleb." Her voice was quiet and certain. "Robert is buried under that cottonwood tree, on land that a thief is standing on.
I know. He held her gaze for another second. Then he reached for his own coat. We ride in an hour, he said. Let me check the rifle. Emmett Cross was a big man with a gray beard and the sunburned squint of someone who'd spent 40 years arguing with the Wyoming weather and had come to a wary, mutual respect with it. He met them at his gate with his hands visible and his expression unreadable, which Caleb recognized as the face of a man who had learned not to show his cards until he knew the game. "Boone," he said. Then his eyes moved to Clara. "This the Whitmore widow I've been hearing about?" "Whitmore," Clara said. "Yes, you've heard about me from Griggs's people? Or from somebody else?" Emmett looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face shifted, a small recalibration, the look of a man reassessing a situation. "Somebody else," he said. "Come inside." Emmett's wife, a spare, sharp-eyed woman named Ruth, set coffee on the table without being asked, and then sat down with them, which told Caleb that this was a household where Ruth's opinion was part of any decision. He liked that immediately. Clara told it straight, the way she always did. No embellishment, no performance. The forged documents, the fake witness signature, the writer who'd come to the cabin, the talk Griggs was spreading in Millhaven. Emmett listened with his big hands flat on the table. Ruth listened with her eyes on Clara's face. When Clara finished, Emmett looked at his wife. Ruth said, "Tell them about Henderson." Emmett exhaled through his nose. "Dale Henderson had 40 acres on the South Fork," he said. "Griggs tried to buy him out twice. Henderson said no, twice. Third time Griggs's lawyer came, he had a document saying Henderson had borrowed money against the land." He paused. "Henderson died before it went to court. Heart, they said." "How old was Henderson?" Caleb asked. 43, Emmett said. Silence settled over the table. "He wasn't a sick man," Ruth said quietly. "He was strong. His father lived to 81. His brother is 50 and healthy." She looked at Clara. "We don't know anything for certain, but we know what we think." Clara's face had gone very still. "Who got Henderson's land?" she asked. "Bank did," Emmett said. "His wife had no legal standing to contest. She left the territory." He looked at Caleb. "I know what you're going to ask me, Boone, and I want to be honest with you about what it cost me to say yes." "Then say it honest," Caleb said. "I've got Ruth," Emmett said. "I've got 2 boys, 16 and 19. I've got 400 acres that my father homesteaded in 1859. He looked at his hands. "If I testify to what Griggs did to my hired hands, and I will, because it's true and because Henderson was my friend, there's a real chance I lose all of it anyway. And I need you to know I understand that going in." "We understand," Clara said. "Do you?" His eyes moved to her, not unkind. "You've already lost everything once, Mrs. Whitmore. You know what it feels like. I'm looking at losing it for the first time, and I'm scared in a way I don't have good words for." Clara held his gaze. "I know," she said. "I'm not going to tell you not to be scared. I'm scared too. I've been scared since the day they walked me off my porch." She paused. "But Dale Henderson's wife left the territory. Thomas Hale left the valley. And every time someone leaves, Griggs learns that it works, and he does it to the next person." Her voice was steady. "I'm not telling you what to choose. I'm just telling you what the choice is really about." Ruth reached across the table and put her hand over Emmett's. Emmett Cross looked at his wife for a long moment. Then he looked back at Clara. "Write down your lawyer's name," he said. "I'll ride the lander next week." They were 2 miles from home when Caleb heard the horses. Not behind them, ahead. Positioned, which was worse, because positioned meant anticipated, meant someone had known where they were going and had gotten ahead of them on the return. He pulled Buck to a stop and held up his hand. Clara stopped her borrowed immediately and said nothing. She'd learned in the last 2 weeks that when Caleb went still, you went still. 3 riders came out of the tree line ahead. They spread across the road with the practiced ease of men who had done this before. The professional blocking posture of hired trouble. The one in the center was thick-shouldered and wore his hat pulled low. He had the kind of face that had been rearranged by violence at some point and hadn't minded. "Caleb Boone," he said, like he was confirming a name on a list. "That's right," Caleb said. "Mr. Griggs wants a word with you." The man's eyes moved to Clara. "With both of you." "Tell Mr.
Griggs to put it in a letter," Caleb said.
The man on the left shifted in his saddle. A small movement, but his hand moved with it, toward his hip. "That's not how this works," the center man said. "No," Caleb said. "I reckon it's not." He kept his voice level. His hand was resting on his thigh, 3 inches from the rifle in the scabbard. "But here's how this works instead. You ride back and tell Griggs that his witness signature is a man who doesn't exist, that we've got a rancher ready to testify to his methods, and that the land office is already looking at the challenge." He paused. "Tell him all of that, and then ask him if he really wants to add 3 counts of criminal threatening to what's already coming at him." The centerman stared at him. Caleb stared back. Clara said, from beside him and slightly behind him, in a voice as flat and cold as creek water in November, "I can see your hand moving, mister.
"Move it another inch, and we'll find out how good your aim is from a spooked horse."
Caleb didn't look at her. He heard the click that meant she'd pulled back the hammer on his spare pistol, which had been in the saddlebag he'd handed her before they left that morning, without making a production of it. The center man looked at Clara, looked back at Caleb. Whatever calculation he was doing, it came up different than it had started. "Mr. Griggs isn't a patient man," he said. "I'm not a patient man either," Caleb said. "Difference is, I'm the one blocking your way home, not the other way around." A long moment. The horses moved restlessly. The centerman wheeled his horse. The other 2 followed. They rode back the way they'd come, not fast, too proud for fast, but they rode. Caleb waited until the sound was gone. Then he exhaled slowly. "You had his spare pistol the whole time?" he said. "You put it in the saddlebag," Clara said.
What was I supposed to think that meant?
"I didn't say anything about it." "You didn't have to." She released the hammer carefully and put the pistol back. Her hand was shaking slightly, he noticed. She noticed him noticing. "I'm allowed to be scared after the fact," she said. "I wasn't scared during." "I know," he said. "That's the part that concerns me." She looked at him sharply. He was almost smiling. "You're still insufferable," she said. "Consistently," he said, and turned Buck toward home.
That night, Caleb sat on the step outside the cabin after Clara had gone in, and looked at the dark for a long time. He was thinking about the 3 riders, about the calculation the centerman had made, and the one he'd made himself, and the half-second margin between a standoff and something that couldn't be taken back. He was thinking about the way Clara had pulled that hammer back without hesitation, without theater, without anything except the cold, practical determination of a woman who had decided she was not going to be moved. He was thinking, if he was honest, about more than that. He went inside. Clara was at the table, writing. He'd found her a journal-style ledger from his supply chest, and she'd been using it to record everything she remembered about Griggs's documents and actions in the valley, building a record for Pierce. She didn't look up when he came in. "The center one," she said. "The big one. He'll come back." "Yes," Caleb said. "With more people." "Yes.
We need to be ready for that. He sat down across from her. She was still writing, her pen moving steadily, her face focused in the lamplight. He watched her for a moment and then looked away, because looking was starting to feel like something he needed to be more careful about. Caleb, she'd stopped writing. She was looking at him with the direct, uncomplicated honesty that he'd come to understand was just her nature. The way some people are made, straight-grained through, no angle to them. What happened to you, those 4 years alone? I don't want that to happen again. After this is over. He was very still. I'm not saying, she started, then stopped, and he saw her choose her words the way you chose footing on uncertain ground. I'm not saying anything except that you're a good man, and good men shouldn't disappear into mountains because the world got too hard. She paused. I know something about that impulse, but I also know, now, that disappearing doesn't fix it.
It just makes the world smaller. He looked at his hands. Is that what you came out of the mountains for? He said. Not just the land, but that. She considered it. I came out of the mountains because I had no choice, she said. But somewhere on the road to Lander, it stopped being about having no choice. She looked at him steadily. I chose. The fire snapped. Outside the cabin, the summer night pressed against the windows, warm and dark and vast. One thing at a time, Caleb said finally. Let's get your land back first. One thing at a time, Clara agreed. She picked up her pen, but she was almost smiling. And so, Caleb realized with something between alarm and relief, was he. He had barely settled the thought when the window above the table exploded inward, glass across the floor. Clara on her feet in an instant, chair scraping back, pen still in her hand. Caleb across the room in 2 strides, grabbing her arm and pulling her away from the window before the second shot came through the wall above where she'd been sitting. Down, he said, and they went down together behind the table. Outside, hooves. Not 3 horses this time. More. The shots stopped after the second one. That was worse than if they'd kept coming. Caleb knew what sustained fire sounded like, and he knew what this was. This was a message delivered in 2 sentences, the kind that wanted you to sit in the silence afterward and understand exactly how exposed you were. He had Clara's arm, and she had the pistol, and for 3 seconds, neither of them breathed. Count, he said quietly. I heard 4 horses, she said, just as quiet. Maybe 5. Same. He got to his knees and moved toward the window low and fast, pressing his back to the wall beside it and looking out from the edge. Dark. The shapes of the tree line. Nothing moving that he could see, which meant they'd already pulled back, done what they came to do, and gone, leaving the broken glass and the 2 bullet holes as their calling cards. He stood, crossed to the door and put the bar across it. Checked the rifle. Checked the spare pistol. His hands were steady, which he noted with a distant part of his mind that observed things without feeling them. Clara was standing up from behind the table. She looked at the 2 holes in the wall, looked at the place where she'd been sitting, looked at Caleb. They weren't trying to kill us, she said. No, he said. Not tonight. Tonight was the warning. She set the pistol on the table. Her hand was not shaking this time. The next one won't be. Caleb looked at her steadily. She looked back at him with the expression he'd come to know as her thinking face. Not fear, not panic, but the hard, concentrated look of a woman running calculations at speed and not liking where they were landing. We can't stay here and wait for them to come back with more men, she said. No, he agreed. And we can't run. No. So we go to Millhaven, she said. Tomorrow. We go straight at Griggs before he comes at us again. We take what we have, Pierce's filing, the false witness name, Emmett's testimony,
and we put it in front of Sheriff Dalton in public, where Griggs can't peer quietly." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "Dalton stood on your porch when they evicted you," he said. "I know." Her jaw was set. "But Dalton isn't Griggs. He's a man who took the path of least resistance when the pressure was all on one side." She paused. "We change what side the pressure is on." He looked at her. Then he looked at the 2 holes in his wall. Then he looked back at her. "I'll saddle the horses at first light," he said. They rode into Millhaven at 9 in the morning, and the town knew they were coming before they'd cleared the main street. Caleb could feel it, the particular quality of attention that a small town produces when something it's been waiting for finally arrives. People on the boardwalk who stopped moving. Conversations that went quiet as they passed. Clara rode straight-backed and looking forward, and Caleb matched her pace. He'd worn his good coat and his clean hat, which was the frontier equivalent of a formal declaration. Clara had pinned her hair and set her chin and looked like exactly what she was. A woman who had been 3 days on a mountain and 2 weeks rebuilding, and had come down out of the hills to collect what was hers. "People are staring," she said, without moving her eyes from the road ahead. "Let them," Caleb said. "Griggs will know we're here within 10 minutes. "Good," he said. "We'll be at Dalton's office in 5.
Sheriff Dalton was behind his desk when they walked in, and the expression on his face cycled through 3 distinct phases in about 2 seconds. Surprise, discomfort, and then a careful blankness that told Caleb the man had been expecting this conversation in some form and had been hoping it wouldn't come. Dalton was 50 or so, lean, with a lawman's watchful eyes and the particular tiredness of a man who had been making compromises for so long he'd forgotten what the alternatives felt like. He looked at Clara with something Caleb couldn't quite name. Not guilt, exactly, but something in the neighborhood of it. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "Miss," Clara said. She put Pierce's filing on his desk, then the homestead certificate, then the page she'd taken from her journal with the false witness name written in her careful hand. "I need you to look at these." "Clara," Dalton started. "Sheriff Dalton," she said, "I need you to look at these." He looked at them. Caleb watched his eyes move across the homestead certificate, the filing, the name James Holt at the bottom of the page. Watched the man's jaw tighten slightly. "The witness signature on Griggs's loan document is a man who doesn't exist," Clara said. "We've checked every land record and resident roll in this valley. There is no James Holt, which means the document is forged, which means the eviction you participated in was illegal." She paused and let that sit. "Last night, someone rode up to Caleb Boone's cabin and put 2 rifle shots through the window, while I was sitting at the table." Dalton looked up from the papers. "I have a lawyer who has filed a formal challenge with the land office," Clara continued. "I have a rancher in this valley who is prepared to testify to Griggs's methods of intimidation. And I have a homestead certificate that predates any loan claim by 2 years. She leaned forward slightly. "What I need from you is a man willing to do his job." Dalton was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Caleb began to reassess whether they'd read him right. Then Dalton said, "Sit down, both of you." They sat. "I know what Griggs is," Dalton said quietly. "I've known for 2 years. I know about Henderson. I know about the wells on the east side." He looked at the desk. "What I didn't have was anyone willing to put their name on paper and stand in front of a judge." He picked up the homestead certificate. "I want to be clear that I'm not proud of how I handled the eviction. I want to be clear about that." "Being clear about it doesn't give me my land back," Clara said. "No," Dalton said. "It doesn't." He set the certificate down. "But this might."
He opened his desk drawer and took out a document of his own, several pages folded together. He put them on the desk facing Clara. Dale Henderson's wife, before she left the territory, came to me. She gave me a sworn statement about what she saw in the weeks before her husband died. He paused. I've been holding it because without corroboration, it was just the word of a grieving widow against the most powerful banker in the county. He looked at Emmett Cross's name on Clara's journal page. If Cross testifies to the intimidation tactics, Henderson's wife's statement becomes corroboration. Clara stared at the folded pages. "You've had this for a year," she said. "Yes," Dalton said. "A year," she said again, quietly, not loudly. The quiet was worse. "Yes." He didn't flinch from it. Whatever else he wasn't a man who flinched from his own failures when forced to look directly at them. "I was afraid. I have a family. Griggs has the circuit judge and the territorial land office, and enough money to make my life very small, very fast." He paused. "But I am also a sheriff, and I took an oath, and I have been failing at it for a year, and I know it." He looked at Clara. "Tell me what you need."
Before Clara could answer, the door opened. Not a knock, not a slow open, a hard, confident open, the kind made by someone who owns the room they're walking into. Walter Griggs was not what Caleb had pictured. He'd built a version of the man in his mind. Heavy, florid, the banker's body. But Griggs was lean and well-dressed, and had pale, intelligent eyes, and the controlled smile of a man who had practiced it until it looked like the real thing. He was 60, maybe, with white hair and a good coat, and he walked into the sheriff's office like he'd designed it. Behind him came two men, not the riders from the road. These were different, better dressed, the kind of hired trouble that wore suits instead of dusters. Griggs looked at Dalton, then at Caleb, then at Clara, and something in the pale eyes sharpened in a way that was unmistakably personal. "Miss Whitmore," he said pleasantly, "I heard you were in town." "Mr. Griggs," she said. Her voice was flat and clear.
"I think we've gotten off on the wrong foot, you and I," Griggs said. He sat down in the chair beside her without being invited, with the absolute ease of someone who has never been refused anything. "This legal challenge is a lot of trouble and expense for something that's already been settled. The loan was legitimate. The documents are legitimate. A federal lawyer is going to tell you the same thing and charge you a great deal more than I imagine you can afford. The witness signature is a man named James Holt," Clara said, "who doesn't exist." Something crossed Griggs's face. Very fast, very controlled. But Caleb saw it and stored it. "Clerical error," Griggs said smoothly. "The actual witness was a man named Holst. Swedish name, spelled wrong by the notary. It happens." "That's a very convenient explanation," Caleb said. Griggs looked at him for the first time. The pale eyes assessed him with the efficient contempt of a man who has measured 1,000 people and found most of them insufficient. "Mr. Boone, your involvement in this matter is interesting. You've been up that mountain for 4 years, and suddenly you're involved in valley business. Makes a man wonder what's brought you back down." "Justice," Caleb said. "Turns out it's a strong motivator." "Or something else," Griggs said, looking from Caleb to Clara, with the particular implication of a man who had already been spreading that talk through town and wanted them to know he had. Clara stood up, not fast, not dramatically. She stood up the way she did everything, with the deliberate, grounded certainty of a woman who knew exactly where her feet were. "Mr. Griggs," she said, "my husband is buried on that land. I watched him break that ground. I watched him build that house. I was with him when he filed that homestead certificate at the Federal Land Office in 1881. And I was with him when he died. And when he died, no loan. There was no debt. There was no document with my signature on it. Her voice was perfectly steady. You forged those papers. You stole my land. And you have done the same thing or something worse to at least 3 other families in this valley. She looked at him without blinking. And I am going to prove every word of that in front of a judge. Griggs looked at her for a long moment. The pleasant smile hadn't moved, which was its own kind of answer. "You're a very determined woman," he said. "Yes," she said. "I am." Griggs stood, straightened his coat, looked at Dalton. "Sheriff, I trust you'll continue to fulfill your responsibilities appropriately." Dalton looked at the papers on his desk. Then he looked at Griggs. "I always fulfill my responsibilities, Mr. Griggs," he said.
That's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Something in Griggs's expression shifted. Barely, a fraction, before the smile covered it again. He nodded once and left. The 2 men in suits followed. The door closed. The 3 of them sat in the office for a moment, in the particular silence that follows a thing that has been building for a long time. "He knows we have the homestead certificate now," Caleb said. "He knew before he walked in here," Dalton said. "He has someone at the land office. Probably got word the moment Pierce filed." He gathered the documents and put them in his desk and locked the drawer. "That smile he does, that's not confidence. That's calculation. He's thinking about how to respond." He looked at Caleb. "How secure is your cabin?" "Was, until last night," Caleb said. "You can't go back there," Dalton said. "Not tonight. He'll expect you to go back. And the men he sends next time won't be there to put holes in walls." Caleb looked at Clara. She met his eyes and held them. He saw the same calculation in her face that he was running in his own head. The rapidly narrowing list of options. The weight of what they'd just done and what it meant for what came next. "Emmett Cross," she said. Caleb nodded. "His place is defensible, and he's already committed." "I'll ride out tomorrow," Dalton said. "I want to take Cross's statement myself. Official, signed, witnessed." He paused. "And I want to send a wire to the Territorial Marshal's office in Cheyenne. Griggs has the circuit judge, but he doesn't own the federal marshal. And Henderson's wife's statement is enough to open a federal inquiry into land fraud if we can get it in front of the right people." "How long will that take?" Clara asked. "Longer than tonight," Dalton said. He stood. "Which is why I'm riding out to Cross with you. Right now, not tomorrow." Caleb looked at him. Dalton met the look directly. "I told you I've been failing at my job for a year," he said. "I'd like to stop now, if it's all the same to you." They rode to Emmett Cross's place in the early afternoon, the 3 of them, and Ruth Cross met them at the gate with the look of a woman who had been watching the road and had been ready for whatever came down it. Emmett heard Dalton out in silence. Heard about Henderson's wife's statement. Heard about the federal marshal option. Sat with it for a moment while Ruth stood at his shoulder with her hand on the back of his chair. "You could have come to me a year ago with that statement," Emmett said to Dalton. "Yes," Dalton said. "I could have." Emmett looked at his wife. Ruth looked back at him and gave the small, definitive nod of a woman who had already made up her mind and was waiting for her husband to catch up. "All right," Emmett said. "Let's take the statement." It took an hour. Dalton wrote it out longhand, every detail, every incident. The hired hands who'd quit, the offers from Griggs, the implied threats, the morning he'd found his gatepost pulled from the ground and left in the road. Emmett signed it. Ruth witnessed it. Dalton folded it with Henderson's wife's statement and put both in his coat. That was when Emmett's older boy, 19 and sharp-eyed like his mother, came in from outside and said, "Pa, there's smoke to the northwest."
Everyone went still. Caleb was at the door first. He looked northwest and felt something cold drop through his chest. The smoke was too thick and too black for a cooking fire. It was the smoke of a structure burning, and it was coming from the direction of the mountain road, from the direction of his cabin. Clara was beside him. She saw it too. He felt her go absolutely still, not frozen, but the stillness of someone absorbing a blow and deciding what to do with it before they let themselves feel it.
"They burned the cabin," she said. "Yes," he said. A beat. 2. He heard her breathe in. "My homestead certificate," she said. "The copy I kept in my bag." "Is in Dalton's desk in Millhaven," he said. "Where we left it." She exhaled. "And Pierce has the filed copy." "Yes." She looked at the smoke for another long moment. "They thought if they burned the cabin, they'd burn the evidence." "They didn't know about the filing," Caleb said. "And they don't know we're here." She turned to look at him. The smoke was rising behind her against the afternoon sky, and her eyes were bright with something. Not tears, not anger exactly, but the compressed, crystallized version of everything that had been taken from her, which had reached a point where it was either going to break or harden into something that couldn't be broken. It hardened. "Good," she said. "Let them think it worked." She turned back to Dalton, who had come up behind them. "Send the wire to the federal marshal tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight." Dalton looked at the smoke, then at Clara. Something in his expression, a long-carried weight, shifted fractionally, like a joint finally setting back into the right place. "Tonight," he said. "And Sheriff," she held his gaze, "when this goes to court, and it will go to court, I need you on the right side of the room." "I know which side that is," he said quietly. "Good," she said. "Then we understand each other." Caleb was watching her, had been watching her since the moment she'd seen the smoke and made her decision. He was thinking about the woman he'd found at the base of a ponderosa pine 3 weeks ago, shaking with cold and terror and the bone-deep exhaustion of someone who had been running out of reasons to keep going. He was thinking about how far she was from that woman now, not because anything had been fixed, not because the land was back, or Griggs was beaten, or the fight was over. None of those things were true. Yet. But something had shifted in Clara Whitmore that went deeper than circumstances. The shift that happens when a person stops surviving and starts deciding. When the thing they're fighting for stops being something that was taken and starts being something they're choosing. She turned and found him watching her and didn't look away. "You lost your cabin," she said. "It was just a building," he said. She shook her head. "It wasn't just a building, and you know it." He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "It wasn't." He looked at where the smoke was beginning to thin. "But I've been hiding in it for 4 years. Maybe it was time to come out." Clara looked at him for a long beat. Then she said, "What you said before, that you told me someone ought to be on the side of a person who doesn't disappear." "I remember," he said. "I think that works both ways," she said. "I think someone ought to be on the side of a man like you, too." She paused. "And I intend to be." Caleb held her gaze. Something moved through him, slow and warm and entirely unfamiliar after 4 years of cold. And he made no move to shut it out this time. He just let it be there. "Then I reckon we've got a fight to finish," he said. She nodded. "We do." Behind them, Emmett Cross was already saddling horses, and Ruth was loading a rifle, and Dalton was composing the wire to Cheyenne in his head. The afternoon was moving fast, and the stakes were as high as they were going to get. And somewhere in Millhaven, Walter Griggs was sitting in his bank, looking at the smoke on the horizon, and believing, for just a little while longer, that he had won.
He was wrong. He just put yet. The federal marshal's name was Isaac Pruitt, and he rode into Millhaven 6 days after Dalton's wire, with 2 deputies, and the particular unhurried authority of a man who didn't need to announce himself, because his presence was announcement enough. Caleb and Clara were at the Cross Ranch when Emmett's boy rode in to tell them. They'd been there 4 days, sleeping in the Cross's spare room, eating Ruth's cooking, spending the evenings going over every piece of documentation they had, with the focused intensity of people who understood that paper was now their only weapon, and it had to be sharp. "The marshal's here," Emmett said, reading his son's face before the boy had finished pulling his horse up. "How many men with him?" Caleb asked. "2," the boy said, and he went straight to Dalton's office. Didn't stop at the bank. Didn't stop anywhere. Clara looked at Caleb. "That's good," she said. "That's something," he said. "Let's not call it good yet." They rode into Millhaven within the hour, and the town had the charged, held-breath quality of a place that knows something is happening and hasn't decided how it feels about it. Marshal Pruitt was still in Dalton's office when they arrived. Dalton opened the door before they knocked, which meant he'd been watching the road. Pruitt was younger than Caleb expected, mid-40s, compact, with a precise mustache and eyes that moved across a room the way a good card player's eyes moved across a table. He shook Clara's hand first, which she registered with a slight straightening of her spine. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I've read Sheriff Dalton's documentation. I have some questions." "Ask them," she said. He asked them for 2 hours. Every detail of the eviction, the forged documents, the false witness name, the writer who'd come to the cabin, the shots through the window, the burned cabin. He asked about Henderson. He asked about Hale. He asked about the East Side families whose wells had gone dry. He took notes in a small, precise hand and asked follow-up questions that told Caleb the man had been building context before he'd ever boarded a horse to come here. When Clara finished, Pruitt looked at his notes. Then he said, "The James Holt signature. You're certain there's no such man in the valley?" "I've lived in this valley for 6 years," Clara said. "I know every family on every parcel from the North Fork to the Southern Ridge. There is no James Holt." "Griggs told you it was a misspelling," Pruitt said. "Holst. Swedish." "Yes. There is also no James Holst," Pruitt said. "I checked the territorial records on the ride up." He closed his notebook. "The signature is invented. The document is fraudulent. That's federal land fraud, which puts it in my jurisdiction rather than the circuit court." He paused. "Which means it is no longer in Judge Carey's jurisdiction." The room went quiet. Dalton said, carefully, "Carey and Griggs have a financial relationship that I am also looking into," Pruitt said. "Yes." He stood. "Miss Whitmore, I'm going to need you and your lawyer in Millhaven for the next several days. I'll be speaking with Mr. Griggs this afternoon." Clara looked at him steadily. "When you speak to him," she said, "he'll tell you the documents are legitimate. He'll have explanations for everything. He's had months to build them." "I know," Pruitt said. "I've spoken to men like Griggs before." He picked up his hat. "The difference is that men like Griggs believe the rules exist for other people. They always have. And that belief makes them careless in ways that matter." He looked at her. "You did good work here, Miss Whitmore. You and Sheriff Dalton and Mr. Boone. Don't lose your nerve in the last mile." "I haven't lost it yet," she said. "No," he said, with what might have been the beginning of a smile. "I can see that." Griggs was arrested the next morning. Not dramatically. Not the way it happened in stories, with shouts and drawn guns, and the satisfying spectacle of a powerful man brought low in front of a crowd. Pruitt went to the bank at 9 in the morning with 1 deputy and a federal warrant, and Griggs came out through the front door in handcuffs, with his coat on straight and his expression showing nothing. And the only drama was the silence of the people on the boardwalk, who watched him walk to the marshal's horse and understood what they were seeing. Clara was across the street. She'd been there since 8:30, standing on the boardwalk outside the dry goods store. And when the bank doors opened, she went very still. Caleb was beside her. He felt her stillness like a physical thing. Not satisfaction, not triumph, but something deeper and quieter. The stillness of a person who has been holding themselves upright through sheer force of will for so long that when the thing they were bracing against finally gives way, the body doesn't know immediately what to do with the absence of the weight. Griggs saw her. His pale eyes found her across the street, with the inevitable precision of a man cataloging who had done this to him. He looked at her for one long, flat moment. Clara looked back at him, without moving. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Everything that needed to be said was in the homestead certificate in Pierce's file, and the federal warrant in Pruitt's hand, and the sworn statements of two families who had been afraid for too long and had decided to stop being afraid. She had already said everything worth saying. Griggs looked away first. Caleb felt Clara exhale beside him, slow and long and complete, the breath of someone setting down something they'd been carrying for a very long time.
"It's not over," she said quietly. "There's still the court. Cutter will fight it."
"I know," Caleb said. "Pierce says federal cases take months."
"I know that too." She looked at him. "You're not worried?"
"I'm always worried," he said. "Worrying and losing are different things." He paused. "You've got the federal marshal, the sheriff, two sworn statements, a homestead certificate, and a forged document with a made-up name on it. Cutter's good, but he's not a magician." He looked at her steadily. "You're going to get your land back, Clara." She was quiet for a moment. Then,
"And you've got no cabin."
"No," he agreed. "No cattle either. They scattered when the cabin burned."
"Some of them. Emmett's boys found 3 of them down in the creek bottom."
She almost smiled.
"That black heifer was probably already in the next county."
"That black heifer," he said, "has probably declared herself sovereign territory by now." Clara laughed. It was a short laugh, surprised out of her, and it transformed her face for a moment in a way he'd been waiting, without knowing he was waiting to see. The face underneath the determination and the grief and the fight. The face of a woman who was actually 30 years old and alive in the world and capable of laughing at a joke about a stubborn cow on the morning a federal marshal had just arrested the man who'd stolen her home. He stored that laugh somewhere, careful. Pierce arrived from Lander the following day, and the 3 of them spent the afternoon at Dalton's office working through the federal case timeline with Pruitt. It was detailed and procedural, and not exciting in the way that the preceding weeks had been exciting, but it had the solidity of something being built correctly. The right foundation, the right materials, the right people in the right rooms. Cutter, Griggs's lawyer, arrived from Cheyenne 2 days later, and spent 48 hours filing motions that Pruitt dismissed, with the efficient finality of a man who had been doing this longer than Cutter had been practicing law. The circuit judge, Carey, recused himself when it became clear that Pruitt's inquiry into the financial relationship had produced documentation. A federal judge from Denver was appointed. It was, as Clara had predicted, going to take months. But the shape of it was clear. And the shape was not in Griggs's favor. On the 4th evening, Clara and Caleb sat on the steps of the Cross Ranch in the warm summer dark. They'd been there long enough now that Ruth had stopped treating them like guests and started treating them like family, which in Ruth Cross's practical vocabulary meant she assigned them chores.
Pierce says I can go back to the Sweetwater land, Clara said. The eviction is stayed for a case. I have the right to occupy.
Caleb nodded. He'd known this was coming, had been aware of it building toward this point in the same way you're aware of a season changing. Not any single sign, but the accumulation of them. When? He asked.
Soon, she said. A few days. I need to check what condition the house is in. Whether Griggs's people damaged anything. She paused. There's a lot of work to do.
Yes, he said. She looked at him. He looked at the dark. The summer night was warm and full of crickets, and the particular ease of attention that has been present so long you only recognize it by its absence.
Caleb.
He looked at her.
The valley's going to need people who know how to fight for it, she said. What Griggs did. It won't be the last time someone tries something like that. The land is valuable, and the territory is still being settled, and there will always be men like him who think the rules are for other people. She paused. The valley needs people who know what the rules are actually for. He waited. I have 40 acres and a house and a cattle operation to rebuild, she said, with a direct, undeflected honesty that was simply her nature. And land enough for more cattle than I can manage alone. And a legal case that's going to require me to be present and vocal and visible for the next several months. She met his eyes. And I would like it very much if you were there.
The crickets, the warm dark, the cross ranch, with its solid light in the window. As what? Caleb asked, quietly. Not evasively. He genuinely needed to know what she was asking. Not because he was uncertain about his own answer, but because Clara Whitmore was a woman who said what she meant and deserved to be asked to say it clearly. She held his gaze. As a partner, she said, in whatever way that means. We can decide the rest as we go. She paused. But I am not asking you to come help me out of kindness. I am asking because you are the best person I know, and because 4 years on a mountain alone is a waste of a person like you. And because... She stopped, started again. Because I noticed, when you smiled about that black heifer, that I wanted to keep seeing you smile like that. For a long time. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I reckon I've been deciding to say yes since the morning I saddled the horses to go to Lander. Clara looked at him. Something in her face shifted. Something that had been held in reserve for a long time, quietly releasing. She didn't cry. She wasn't the type. But her eyes were bright with it, and she let him see that, which he understood was its own kind of trust. Then it's settled, she said. It's settled, he said. They rode to the Whitmore Ranch on a Thursday morning, just the two of them, with the summer at its full height and the valley gold and green around them in a way that made it hard to believe the same ground had hosted the things it had hosted over the last weeks. The house was intact. Griggs's men had gone through it, drawers open, things moved, the look of people who had been searching for the homestead certificate they hadn't known was already in a lawyer's desk. But the structure itself was sound. Robert Whitmore had built it solid, and solid things endure. Clara went through the house, room by room. Caleb waited outside and let her have it. He could hear her moving through the rooms, the specific sounds of a person taking inventory of what had been touched and what had been spared, the private sounds of a woman returning to the place where her life had happened. She came out after a while and stood on the porch, looked at the land. Caleb watched her do it, the slow, deliberate look of someone reclaiming something with their eyes before they reclaim it with their hands. The east corner, she said. He walked with her to the east corner of the property. The cottonwood was there, big and old, its roots deep in the ground that Robert Whitmore had broken with his own hands. The grave marker was simple. A wooden cross, Clara's own handwriting in carved letters. Robert Whitmore, 1851 to 1886. He broke this ground, and it remembers him. Clara stood there for a long time. Caleb stood beside her and said nothing, because there was nothing to say, and she didn't need anything from him in this moment except his presence. He'd learned that about grief, that the people who'd lived through their own understood that the worst thing you could do was fill the silence. After a while, Clara said, "He would have liked you." Caleb looked at the marker. "Tell me about him." And she did. She talked for a long time, standing by the cottonwood in the summer morning, about the man who had broken that ground and built that house and chosen that spot for his grave because the afternoon light was right. She talked about his quiet humor and his bad back, and the way he'd been with cattle, and the way he'd looked at her across a dinner table like she was something worth looking at. She talked without any performance, just the straight remembering of a woman who had loved a man and lost him, and was setting him down now in the right place before she moved forward. Caleb listened. When she finished, there was a good silence between them, the kind that has been filled and settled. "All right," Clara said. She straightened. The set of her shoulders changed, the way they always changed when she was moving from one thing to the next. "The south fence needs work. The cattle operation is going to need at least 2 good horses, and someone who knows the valley grazing patterns." She looked at him. "You know the valley." "I know the mountain," he said. "The valley, I'll learn." "You will," she said. "Fast, too, I expect." They walked back to the house together, their shadows stretching long in the morning light. The case concluded in November, 4 months after Marshal Pruitt's wire had gone to Cheyenne. Walter Griggs was convicted on 7 counts of federal land fraud. Cutter had fought well, but the false witness name had been the crack in the foundation that everything else followed from. Judge Carey was separately removed from the bench pending investigation. 2 of Griggs's hired men, including the thick-shouldered rider from the road, were charged with criminal threatening and arson. The Whitmore land was formally and legally returned to Clara on a Tuesday. Pierce rode out with the documentation in his coat and handed it to her on her own porch with a formality that she appreciated, because some things deserved ceremony, even if the ceremony was small. She held the document in both hands, read her name on it, read the land description: 40 acres, Sweetwater Valley, Fremont County, Wyoming Territory. "Thank you," she said to Pierce. "You took a risk." "You took a bigger one," he said. "Several of them." After he left, she sat on the porch steps for a while. Caleb was out with the cattle. He'd been out since early morning, moving the small herd they'd rebuilt over the past months to the winter pasture before the season turned hard. She could hear him sometimes, faintly, talking to the animals in that low, steady way he had, the tone that meant everything is fine, and you're safe, and keep moving. She had learned, over these months, that the tone wasn't only for the cattle. She heard his horse before she saw him, coming back up the valley trail in the late afternoon. He rode up to the fence, and she held up the document. He read it from the saddle. Read it again. Then he looked at her. "It's done," she said. He swung down from the horse, came up to the porch, took the document and looked at the words. Her name, the land description, the federal judge's signature, with the same careful attention he gave to all things. "It's done," he said. She leaned her shoulder against his arm. It was a simple gesture, uncalculated, just the natural movement of a body toward a person it had come to think of as home. He didn't move away. His hand found hers and held it, which was as straightforward and unperformed as everything between them had always been. "The mountain road is going to ice over in another few weeks," he said. "I know. There's a section of the north fence that's not going to hold the first hard frost.
I know that too.
Spring's going to take work.
Spring always takes work, she said. That's what spring is.
He was quiet for a moment. Clara.
Yes?
I have not been a man who expected much these last years, he said. I made a particular kind of peace with not expecting things. It was easier. He paused. You took that apart. She looked at him.
Is that a complaint?
No, he said. It's the opposite of a complaint. He looked at the valley in the late light.
I've just wanted to say it out loud. That you did that. That it mattered.
Clara looked at the valley too. The land that Robert had broken and loved and was buried in. The land she had walked 3 days barefoot through a mountain range to fight for. The land that bore her name on a federal document in her hand. The land that had, in the fighting for it, brought her to this porch with this man who spoke to cattle in a low, steady voice and never once told her to be afraid.
Funny thing about storms, she said.
He looked at her.
Sometimes they lead you exactly where you're meant to be.
He was quiet for a moment. Then I'm glad I heard you cry. She turned and looked at him fully, and he looked back, and the valley held them both in the long last light of the summer's end. Two people who had lost everything that defined them, and had come, through fighting and stubbornness and the particular grace of hearing someone when they needed to be heard, to something new.
Not a replacement for what had been lost. Something different. Something that had been built out of the wreckage and the winter and the long climb back. Something that was theirs. The north fence needed work. The cattle needed moving. The case paperwork needed filing. Spring was going to take work, the way spring always did. The way everything worth keeping always did. They went inside together. Behind them, the valley settled into evening, wide and gold and quiet, holding the graves of the people who had loved it, and the footprints of the people who were still here, still working, still choosing it. The land remembered. It always did.